The laughter came fast and sharp, cutting through the small cafe like a blade, and in that moment the single father knew he had made a mistake by agreeing to this blind date at all, because the woman across from him was already standing up, still smiling as if his life were nothing more than a bad joke she couldn't wait to escape. He sat frozen, hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, the weight of years pressing on his chest, unaware that this public humiliation was only the beginning of a moment that would change everything he believed about respect, dignity, and unseen sacrifices. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people who keep going even when life laughs at them, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel Lonely Dad Strong Heart, because stories like this remind us that humanity still matters. He had arrived early that evening, as he always did, choosing the corner table where he could see the door and the street outside, a habit formed over years of responsibility and caution. His jacket was old but clean, his shoes worn but polished carefully the night before after his daughter had fallen asleep on the couch beside him. Becoming a single father had not been part of his dreams, but life rarely asks permission before changing everything. His wife had been gone for 5 years now, taken suddenly by illness, leaving him with grief, unanswered questions, and a 4-year-old girl who depended on him for everything. Since then, his world had shrunk into school drop-offs, grocery lists, late-night laundry, and whispered promises to his daughter that things would be okay even when he wasn't sure they would be. The blind date had been arranged by a coworker who insisted he needed to move on, that he deserved happiness too. He had resisted at first, uncomfortable with the idea of selling himself in a single evening, especially knowing that his life came with baggage most people didn't want. But loneliness has a way of wearing people down quietly, and eventually he agreed, telling himself that even if nothing came of it, at least he tried. He practiced what he would say, how he would explain his life without sounding broken or desperate, how he would mention his daughter without letting his voice shake. When she arrived, she looked exactly like the photo he had been shown, confident and well-dressed, carrying herself with the ease of someone who had not been forced to rebuild their life from ashes. At first, things felt manageable. He listened more than he spoke, nodding politely, answering questions honestly but briefly. Then the topic shifted to family, and as it always did, his truth changed the air between them. He explained that he was a single dad, that his daughter was his world, that his days revolved around her needs. He didn't complain. He didn't seek pity. He simply stated facts, the way one does when there is no alternative. The reaction was immediate and painful. Her smile turned into something sharper, her interest fading as if someone had dimmed the lights. She laughed, not softly or nervously, but openly, as if amused by the inconvenience of his existence. She stood up, shaking her head, clearly uninterested in continuing the evening, and walked away still laughing, leaving him sitting there exposed and small. Other patrons noticed. A few looked away out of discomfort. 1 or 2 stared openly. No one said anything. He didn't chase her or argue. He simply sat there, shoulders heavy, feeling the familiar sting of judgment he had learned to endure. This wasn't the first time someone had seen his responsibilities as a burden rather than a testament to love. He reached for his wallet, ready to pay and leave. Quietly, when something unexpected happened. Near the entrance of the cafe, an older man had just walked in. His presence was calm but commanding, the kind of presence that didn't need noise to be felt. He wore simple clothes, but there was something unmistakable in the way he stood, in the discipline of his movements, as if life had trained him to be alert even in ordinary moments. He paused, eyes scanning the room, and his gaze landed on the single father still seated alone. The older man stopped walking. His posture shifted. Something in his eyes changed, recognition mixed with disbelief. He took a step closer, studying the man's face, his posture, the way he carried himself even in defeat. Then, without hesitation, the older man straightened fully and raised his hand in a firm, respectful salute. The cafe fell silent. The single father looked up, confused, unsure if this gesture was meant for him. He glanced around, embarrassed, but the older man's eyes never left his. The salute was steady, deliberate, and filled with meaning. It was not mockery. It was respect. The woman who had walked out laughing stopped near the door, turning back in surprise. Her expression shifted as she recognized the older man. It was her father. He lowered his hand and walked toward the table, pulling out the chair across from the single father and sitting down without asking permission, as if this moment belonged to both of them. The daughter watched from a distance, confused and uncomfortable, her laughter gone. The older man's attention remained fixed on the man before him, and the room seemed to wait for an explanation. The older man began to speak, not loudly, but with a weight that carried. He explained that years ago, he had been a soldier, and later a commanding officer, responsible for leading men through impossible situations. He had learned to recognize strength that didn't announce itself, courage that existed quietly. He spoke of the way the single father held himself, of the weariness in his eyes that only comes from long nights and unshared burdens, of the hands that had clearly worked and sacrificed without complaint. He spoke of single parents as unsung heroes, fighting battles every day without medals, without applause. He shared that he had raised his own children during long absences, missing birthdays and milestones, and that he had seen firsthand how much it takes to show up consistently for someone who depends on you. He admitted that he had made mistakes, that he had underestimated people before, and that he refused to let his daughter do the same without learning a lesson. The woman stood frozen, shame creeping into her face as she realized the depth of her cruelty. What she had dismissed as weakness, her father recognized as resilience. What she had laughed at, he honored. The single father listened in stunned silence, emotion tightening his throat. He wasn't used to being seen like this, to having someone acknowledge his sacrifices without being asked. For years, his efforts had gone unnoticed, dismissed, or taken for granted. In that moment, something inside him shifted. The humiliation of earlier didn't disappear, but it was softened by validation he hadn't known he needed so badly. The older man finished by saying that respect is not earned by status, wealth, or convenience, but by responsibility accepted and carried with dignity. He stood up again, saluted once more, and placed a hand briefly over his heart before turning to leave. The woman didn't follow immediately. She stood there, caught between pride and regret, realizing that her laughter had revealed more about her character than the man she had judged. She eventually left the cafe alone, quieter than she had entered. The single father remained seated for a long time after, staring at the empty chair across from him. Around him, life slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed, cups clinked, but inside him, something fundamental had changed. For the first time in a long while, he felt proud of the life he had built, imperfect as it was. He paid for his coffee and walked out into the night, the city lights reflecting off the pavement, his steps lighter than when he had arrived. When he reached home, his daughter was asleep, her small chest rising and falling steadily. He sat beside her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and thought about the example he was setting for her, about strength, humility, and self-worth. He realized that even if the world laughed sometimes, there would always be people who understood, who saw beyond the surface. Days passed, and the memory of that night stayed with him, not as pain, but as a quiet source of strength. He stopped seeing himself as someone to apologize for. He carried himself differently, spoke with more confidence, and allowed himself to believe that his story mattered. He understood that not every rejection was a reflection of his value, and not every laugh deserved his shame. Life didn't suddenly become easier. Bills still came. Work was still exhausting. Parenting was still overwhelming at times. But now, beneath it all, there was a steady belief that his sacrifices were meaningful, that his love was powerful, and that one day, his daughter would grow up knowing what true strength looked like. Near the end of this story, if it has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Lonely Dad's Strong Heart, because every interaction helps keep stories like this alive for people who feel unseen. And before we end, I want to ask you something special. Please comment below and share what this story made you feel, or tell us about a moment when someone surprised you with respect when you least expected it. Your words might be exactly what another viewer needs today. The single father never saw the older man again, but he didn't need to. The salute had already done its work. It had reminded him that dignity doesn't depend on approval, that love carried quietly is still powerful, and that sometimes, the people who laugh first are the ones who still have the most to learn.